Welcome everybody to the STS Information Literacy discussion. My name is Michael Goetz. I am a member of the STS Information Literacy Committee. And for those of you who have not participated before in these monthly chats, we record these monthly chats on a variety of information literacy topics. And if all of these are recorded and archived, and I just entered in the link where all of these previous chats are archived, and the chat today will be archived if you'd like to check that out at a future date. I'd like to introduce our discussion leader today on Rebecca Zeno-Plotke, and she will be talking on science literacy and reading primary literature in biology. Just a brief bio on Rebecca. Rebecca is a research and instruction librarian at Worcester Polytechnic Institute with a focus on science librarianship. She works primarily with first-year students in an interdisciplinary, project-based first-year seminar teaching students about the depth and intricacies of the research process. Basically, research is hard and messy, but fun. Rebecca also works with the biology and biotechnology department in the introductory and upper level courses and a few classes in the social science and policy department. We'll now turn the time over to Rebecca, but if you have questions, any of the participants, feel free to enter in your questions or comments as the presentation is going on in the chat bar below. But Rebecca, we'll turn it over to you.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are today. If there's any problem hearing me, I can see the chat, so I'll also try to monitor that as I go along. So please do ask questions, interrupt the presentation. As noted, it's supposed to be a discussion, so I don't have any problem with back and forth. So one other thing that I'll note is that the slides will be available in archive. We were talking a bit before we got started. I have some supplemental material, so we'll try to make that available. But as we go through, if I mention something that you're interested in, either a lesson plan or visual or something of that nature, please don't hesitate to email me directly, and I'm happy to share any information that I go over that isn't in the slides. The other thing is, sorry about the scrolling of the slides. It seems like when there was a technology upgrade, things don't advance quite the same. So you'll get a little preview of each slide below. As mentioned, I'm a research and instruction librarian, and I will say that great job on pronouncing my name, but we are actually Worcester Polytechnic Institute because here in Massachusetts, we pronounce things in a special manner. So this morning, or this afternoon, we're going to talk about a little bit, and I'll get into the details of the course, but let me just mention for those of you where this isn't necessarily your area of expertise or what you're looking to learn more about, there are some really great broad definitions talking about what science literacy is, and it ranges, of course, from K through 12, elements that are standards in that area of teaching, but also then looked at in higher education, and you'll see some overlap there. And so for this course, the faculty that I was working with had particular objectives looking at elements of science literacy. So understanding articles, both how to engage in the difference between what's out there in the popular press, and then how to have sort of these social conversations, and really looking at validity of conclusions. Those were their elements of science literacy that came to play in one way, and then also really what it meant in higher education and in biology, and really what are the elements of primary literature and the importance of that. So that. And then for my particular work in conjunction with the faculty, I was looking at particular elements of the information literacy component. So some of it is reflective of the framework, changes in the framework, and trying to build in the scope that the framework provides, and some of it is more along the lines of the standards. So some of these, understanding the definition of primary literature. So being able to distinguish that from other types of literature. In particular, in this class, as I'll go through, we looked at really sharply defining secondary and tertiary literature to give the students a strong scope of how that might break down and why each type of literature is important. We looked at recognizing how to locate appropriate sources using library resources. So the course, and I'll get into a little more detail about that in a moment, but the course was a 1,000 level course, so 4 majors, but students that maybe have not taken a research class at all or have not looked at primary literature in the sciences, or there's maybe their first exposure. So really how to engage in the fundamentals of using what's available at the library. And then we worked a lot on citation as both an ethical component to really being a strong biologist, what that meant to be within the standards of the community of scientists there, and then how to do it appropriately. For this class, we use CSE, the Council of Science Editors, the name year version, and we had a lot of success. I'll talk a bit about what kind of questions we had with that. So a little bit about WPI that makes some of this unique. So we are a STEM-focused university. Our top majors are mechanical and electrical engineering. Students, we range in classes from computer science to, we have a game development major here as well. And so we have a really strong component of STEM students. We do have projects that students work on in the humanities as well. So there are also students that do social science and humanities, but we have, like I said, our top major is mechanical engineering. We work on a 7-week term system here, so students take 4 terms, A, B, C, and D, and they run for 7 weeks, but the class content is 15 weeks worth of content, so they are in class every day, either for an hour or every other day for 2 hours. So there's a very quick pace here with a lot required. So we don't have the same flow as a semester class would have. One of the other things that's really important to note is there are no prerequisites or required order of courses. So you can come in as a first-year student and take an upper level class if you have the background for it. There will be recommendations. The course catalog will recommend certain things. Many students come in with a lot of AP credit, so they jump ahead in math sequences, things of that nature. And this provides a bit of a challenge when we look at some of these fundamental skills. So in the biology department, what they've seen is that because students can jump into different level classes, depending on availability, depending on the structure of their schedule, they may jump into a class without having the fundamentals necessary. So there isn't as strategic scaffolding that you might see in other departments. So you can take a 2000 level class, and I work with other classes, so I work also with a cell biology class. You can take these classes and have not actually taken any other biology class. So you may have some technical knowledge or may think that you can handle it, but in actuality, you not really have a great sense of the content necessary. And so there are some challenges with that. The reason I note that this was a 4 majors class is that we have a couple of 1,000 level classes that are for non-majors, and those classes are a little bit broader. Students are also required to do a basic science requirement. So in this class, even though it's for majors, some students, there are seniors in the class, things of that nature, that are looking to fulfill that final basic science requirement. And so it can throw off some of the learning outcomes or learning objectives for the course. Students also do a qualifying project their senior year in their major, and a lot of faculty have found that students can get to their major qualifying project and still not understand the components of primary literature. So this course really tried to look at breaking those fundamentals down to build some of these skills to help students get at their major qualifying project or their capstone project and at least have the foundational elements. All right, so the class itself, as I mentioned, was biodiversity. It was 4 majors, 75 to about 100 students. What we had in-class and out-of-class work. So the faculty that I worked with alongside of her biodiversity lecture content, she ran 5 modules on primary literature. The modules all looked at different elements of primary literature, elements of an article, I should say, of a research article. And all of the articles that the students reviewed, they had biodiversity content in them. So it was a mix of both content and literature. So if it was looking at the introduction, it was looking at an article that had a clear hypothesis, noting what that is. And the general structure of the modules were to take an online module that had also a quiz and a homework associated with it. And this all built around a final term project, which this year was to take as a final presentation in groups to discuss a piece of primary literature based on a rubric. So they had 7 weeks leading up to their presentation of a piece of primary literature. So what we did for library work is the students worked through Module 1, which was a online, in the first week of class. So they had lectures and conferences. So they worked through the module in their conferences. This module, this is one of those supplementary pieces of materials that I can actually put together a visual representation of this. So right now it's embedded in a Canvas site, so embedded in their LMS system. And what I can do is take some screenshots of that if people are interested. So you can either email me or we can find a way to get that hosted on the archive. So the way the module worked, I'll just give a quick breakdown, is it's a visual guide, a visual step through of searching for information using the library page. It defines what primary literature is, and it provides to see, it basically walks students through using our discovery layer and some of our specialized databases. At the end of the first module, they have a homework where they then have to find, using library resources, primary literature, secondary literature, and tertiary literature. So the module goes through this. They then have that homework, and then they have a quiz on that. After all of that's completed, I then did an in-class visit, and this is where we had a lot of success. So the module took away some of the time of that clicking through, the searching, the modeling of the searching, and we were able to have a stronger in-depth outcome of looking at literature. So the questions I got in class really reflected that the students had learned the basics of the searching, and we were able to talk about the components of the literature. I also attended final presentations, so I was able to see where there was still a gap and where there was more transparency needed in the beginning about what elements were still confusing, on average. Of course, there were stronger teams and there were weaker teams, but on average, where there was still a gap in how students presented on primary literature. So the teaching outcomes, as far as what we received from the students, so I had my learning outcomes and we had teaching outcomes. The students asked more advanced questions during the in-class discussion. So I had really great response about how to cite information and incorporate it appropriately. So I had questions, instead of general questions, I had questions about the difference between citing a monograph versus a journal article. We had questions about review articles versus primary literature and how to distinguish the difference between them. Questions about impact factor on certain journals and how much did that play into things. Questions about the particular details of citing, finer points. So I felt as though this structure allowed us to get into the deeper end of primary literature. So they also had much more varied and advanced sources. I had taught this class previously with this faculty member without using the modules, and that first class and their final projects reflected much more reliance on web resources, where in biology there are some web resources that can be very important, things like, depending on what you're looking at, but things such as, the ICUN species database, some of the field reports, the governmental field reports, but this was much more varied. So we saw a variety of articles and a variety of other supplementary material. And as I mentioned, we had this much stronger response to proper formatting of citations versus just the general questions. So we had students really trying to understand how to incorporate their material correctly. So a couple of things for this class, we defined primary literature as original research. We also gave a general parameters on what we considered options. So we said peer-reviewed articles, research articles, monograph, government document, or a notebook. We had a few other items in the module, but these were the main categories. We looked at, we defined secondary literature as something that condenses or synthesizes the primary literature, and we narrowed that down to books, review articles, newspapers, or magazine articles. And I respect that between secondary and tertiary literature, some of these in some fields may overlap, and even in the sciences, there may be discrepancies of how this plays out. But we defined it as tertiary as dictionaries, encyclopedias, handbooks, and fact sheets. So one of the things where you got a lot of questions was about this tertiary literature. So I provided supplemental CMS or LMS Canvas instructions on how to narrow down to dictionaries and use that encyclopedia information. Some references that just for what I've talked about here, a couple of good journal articles. I think there were some pre-readings that were out there, and just the original thing there, which brings me to questions and answers. And I can go through more of the class plan. I can go through also some of the other learning outcomes. But love to hear what people's thoughts are, other areas that they have found difficult with the primary literature. We're doing this in a couple of different classes in other ways. So I work in 3 other biology classes, and we've navigated in some other ways, but this particular one was for biodiversity. I can see some typing. If people have mics, they can talk as well. I don't know what's typical here. And yes, I think I'll be happy to share the screenshots, no problem. I'm not sure the best way to put that together, but I'll see if I can make a PDF of what the module looks like in Canvas. Yes, I can talk about the class visit, absolutely. So I can also, I was going to share the lesson plan, so if people would like that, I would be happy to do that as well. So the class visit ran like this. I went into class for about 20 minutes. I used to do an hour in that class, but the module takes up, I would say, that other 40 minutes. And so it's allowed us to have this. What's been really nice about, yes, I can share the class plan, no problem. What's been really nice about this particular way of running this class in a big class, like, well, for us, a big class, 75 to 100 students. We do have some bio classes that are 150. I'm sure those of you at larger universities are laughing. And so what we do in the 20 minutes is I go in and I review questions and answers from the module. I do some modeling of searching and some of the things that may come up as far as technical issues, also looking at what kind of results we get when we search and comparing to what results they got when they did their searching. So we look a little bit at that as well. We also, I also go beyond just the initial discovery layer, so our main search, which is summon for those of you that use it, and we look at what happens when we look in some of the specialized databases and actually review some of the components of an article right there. So then we talk about citations. So it's a short in class, but the first part is really covered. And as I said, we have 7 weeks, so there's some follow-up after that. What I do is some posting, further posting as students are working through their own projects in their class site. So hopefully that gets you started on understanding the class plan. Hopefully that answers that first question. Let me see here what else I have. Okay, do we spend time in discussion different types of articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals? Short communications, systematic, yes. Excellent point to note that in the class, when I pull up results, we do some talking about the different results that are published. So we talk about short communications, definitely review articles since students really struggle with differentiating between reviews and original research. The faculty has modules that go on to discuss more elements, including some of that notes, meta-analysis, other aspects of research. So it's not something that I cover, but it's something that's covered in the class as a whole. One of the things that we've done, or I've worked on, starting to work on in some of the other classes, is to do, please chime in what other folks are doing. So one of the things that we'll be doing in one of the other classes, in a cell biology class, is we'll be doing an exercise comparing and contrasting the review article of a particular topic alongside the primary literature. So they'll have sort of a checklist matrix of elements of these things, and they'll be comparing and contrasting that in class. So this particular class We didn't do an exercise of that nature because it just can't be done really successfully in 20 minutes. But yes, there are other classes where we are working at that level of distinction. I've had a lot, I can say I've had a lot of enthusiasm. I've been working on supplementary materials for most of the biology faculty that I work with, and they've all been very excited about it. Very welcome. But if people have had success with other particular resources, we're always looking to build out our curriculum. I've found that some of the distinctions that I've run into so far, do you have an approach or faculty? Oh, so yes, I can say that I have sent faculty resources and said, you struggle with primary literature. And I also have a relationship with the bio department, so a lot of it's been based off of that. Yes, I do have a rubric. So the faculty have looked at the rubric for their presentations. Yes, I can. I can absolutely share that. But there was another question. I feel like I missed it. Oh, one of the things I will say that a distinction that I'm still working on is I've had students bring me primary literature from an educational perspective, so something like the biology teacher. So it's primary literature, it's in biology, but it's educational. And it has the same components or the same technical components of an original research article. So that distinction is something that is a transparency that I didn't have come up until I got the question. So it's something that I didn't initially think to be transparent in articulating, but it's something that I've run into and need to be a little bit more clear about the type of original research for certain classes. Well, a 3-hour library session. That's amazing, but really long. Yes. So I think that's Peter's question. Your course sounds fantastic. Sounds like you have a lot of time. Peter's question is something that came up. I don't know how many of you can see the chat well or if anybody's missing it, but on the ethical use of figures or tables, that actually came up from another friend, not at this institution, who teaches a lot of labs. And she has that problem all the time where they lift figures and tables. And I told her to try to work with her librarian to come in and help her out with that. But it's something that I haven't brought to our lab faculty yet, but I agree. I think it's something that is part of science literacy. I think it goes back into that broad scope where I started. Yes, it's part of our information literacy, but it's also about this broad scope of engaging in this valid conclusion, social conversation, and as well, I don't think it's outside the scope. I just haven't incorporated it yet. I think it's common in lab reports. I know that's one of the complaints, students just pulling things right from their lab material without citing. So I'd be interested if someone teaches actually to that and has materials on it. Of typing. or if other folks work in lab classes outside of some of the lecture classes. So I don't work in the lab classes just yet. I work in biodiversity, cell biology, and human biology. So yes, we did talk about science literacy standards broadly at the beginning of the class, and then they were defined more by scope throughout the other modules, in particular through the content. There's a lot of transparency on the way her syllabus is set up, and outcomes are defined in that. And so that was noted broadly at the beginning, and then the final project really ties together all of the modules, which is really nice. So they're using all of the elements as they've gone through. There's also a pre and post test. Yes, why are we doing this type of thing? So part of module 1, actually a big part of, and I will make sure I capture that as well, is why do we read and use primary literature, about understanding the nature of other scientists, understanding the conversation that's going on. So I'll make sure to capture that pre-information as well for folks. And I will be clear that I helped create, or create is fine. The first module only on the library information. So I don't want to take away from the publication and work that the faculty, Dr. Maria Bockerman, has done creating this herself. Yeah, I think it helps the students to reframe visuals as information. Well, I like that definition. Great. So Dr. Bockerman uses the content in the biodiversity class to, they're tailored together. So if one week they're talking about trophic cascades, then there's an article that reflects that content. And so she has specific articles for each module. So she'll have technical articles where maybe there's a strong hypothesis, clearer analysis. If they're looking at a correlation study, that's a correlation study, right? But they're broken down into bite-sized elements. Exactly. So each module has an element that's focused on, aligned with the technical content. So my technical content is the finding the information, defining it, and so that module is aligned with what I do. And then as they go through the different elements, they will have a piece of primary literature that goes with that. So they are expected to understand, and in their final presentation, they have to present a piece of primary literature talking about describing what the hypothesis, providing information about the type of journal it came from, the type of study that it is, summarizing the results, each element has to be clearly defined. Uh, and so, yes, they go through full circle. Um, sure. So I think one of the things that we've found um, to be successful with the students is um, annotating some of the articles, so really pulling apart the different pieces and doing it in this scaffolded way. And um, you know, I think that there's always going to be some of those frustrations that students experience, either searching for it because if you rely on some of the filters online, if you click a lot of discovery layers like ours, Summon has a filter that peer-reviewed primary literature, and it can get information can get really lost in that. And so we really tried to look at the elements and sort of have this matrix of things for people to compare around. Yeah, I think it'd be great to share that visual information. I'd be interested as well. There is a clue words. Searching on some of those clue words can be helpful. I have not integrated it fully, but there is also a nice annotated piece out of North Carolina's or North Southern Carolina University. That's an online annotated piece of primary literature where students can hover over that. If I can find that, I will add it to the discussion. If anyone else has it, they can add it to the discussion. I have it, so add that in. So this is one that I think um, is helpful. I think that they all have their limitations, strengths, and challenges, but I think that this is visually useful. We work here a lot on looking at yes, Kenyan is one of the things in the pre-reading. The recommended reading, yes. That piece was a big inspiration for us as well. Um, so one of the things that we look at here is options for students to access the material. In the most universal platform, we have a lot of international English language learners, students with accommodation needs, and just generally providing access. This particular tutorial that I posted has some elements that are good for some of those students, but also may be challenging for other students. So we like to have a couple of options, visual, written. It's a bit it would be a bit tough for a student if they were trying to print it out, so we've created our own printed versions of that annotated article. And I believe the Kenyan information is all open access as well, so should be able to be available. The other article I posted was not, so if someone can't get access to that, I'm sure we can figure that out. other concerns or things that folks would like to share? So what I will do, since there was a decent amount of interest, I will, I guess, get an updated version of the slides with um, supplemental slides showing one providing the lesson plan, or at least a modified version of the lesson plan, and one with a modified version of what I can capture from the module. Uh, the this particular round, the faculty selected the readings. We do discuss certain ones, but it's her content knowledge. So she will ask me if I think that there's any concerns or issues. But in general, she selected the readings for this class. Students, where they're encouraged, is the students are encouraged to make a research consultation to get help selecting their own articles to review for their final presentation. And we have had students, or I have had students come in and get help with that. So, which makes most sense. I don't know if we have something like a journal club here. Um, Not as far as I'm aware. I know faculty have certain things like that, but we'll do, and they'd love to talk about how that works. I'd be interested. Does sound like a good idea. I know when I've worked at another institution that the nursing program had a journal club, but here we don't. Oh, okay. Yep. So they are undergraduate students. Um, they are majors, but it is a 1,000 level class. So sometimes there are non-majors that take the class, and sometimes there's a spectrum of students that are seniors, things of that nature. Um, I think that this type of uh, foundational material can work for majors, pre-majors, non-majors. If they're in the sciences, they will be engaging in this type of literature. It depends on I don't know how much you missed, but WPI. I'll just repeat that WPI doesn't have a required course structure. So there are courses that students have to take for their major, but they can take them in an order that they please. Um, so I guess it would depend on how structured your courses are. If there's a nice foundational scaffolded way that students engage in the information, there might be levels in which you can get in at the outcome level. You know, talking to um, the faculty that do some of these first year classes. Not maybe you could say a little bit more about what pre-major means at your institution. Yeah, so this despite being majors was for first year students, so and undergraduate students. So I think there are some classes that I've worked in where it's a little less content specific and more generally understanding primary literature and the sciences. So broader searching, less tailored to, you know, the examples might be a broader spectrum. So all of the articles or examples that I go over, all the searching that I do is tailored to the biodiversity content that they're working on. So my example, and this will show up in the class plan, is about jellyfish and trophic cascades. So, you know, biodiversity, climate change, and jellyfish. So if there's a broader elements, you may need to include more, engage in more elements of primary literature. This is scoped down to biology. Or biology, ecology, I should say, um, not health or cell biology. I will also say if people, I don't know if this is not on the slides, but my contact I can be reached at.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for presenting this information and leading a really great discussion. If any of you have any more questions, feel free to type those in now. But just as a reminder, we will have this chat archived in the slides, which will have an updated with some of those extra handouts and rubrics that we talked about. That will get that added to the slide deck. That will be posted onto the chat archive that was shared below, or I can send it again. That you can go ahead and just find those at this link below. But thank you everybody for attending, and if you have any other questions, feel free to enter that or to enter those now. But otherwise, thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone. I'm glad for any feedback that you have. I'm happy to, you know, keep the discussion going. Offline, but I'm happy to keep the discussion going.